as the 60s being what they are, just all this evolution, if you will, I guess societal, just society itself is just students,
a lot of upheaval,
war, I mean, civil rights, women's rights later on, things like that. Did you, how did that affect the membership in the Communist Party as you saw? Did it mobilize? Did membership increase, or did it help to? How did that affect? Did it as best as you, I guess, as best you can, like from the 60s, early 60s to then? What did you see, kind of growing up? Did you see an increase or more of a fervor?
Well, it was. I mean, I can mostly talk about here later because I wasn't in St. Louis. There parallel things happened there. My parents were still there, but I'm not as familiar with that. But here, I think that there were two main positive effects on the party. One was that it really allowed for a break from how the party had to function during the McCarthy period. In the early 60s to the mid-60s, there were finally a number of important Supreme Court decisions that invalidated major sections of the Smith Act, the Taft-Hartley Act, the McCarran Act. I'm sorry, not the Taft-Hartley Act, but the McCarran Act and the Smith Act, under which people had been prosecuted under. And society was starting to change, so politics and talking about politics and getting petitions signed was starting to be more acceptable than it had been. I mean, I still remember the first few times I went out on the streets with petitions, and it was not uncommon. You'd ask a woman to sign a petition. She'd say, "I'm sorry, I don't know about that. I'll have to ask my husband. He's the one who knows." And of course, he would say no. And you know, the experience that people had was, even if they hadn't had it themselves, they saw other people who were vilified just for signing petitions. So they wouldn't do anything because they were scared. This was extremely widespread, and that started to change. Just the weight of the number of youth activists and movements and demonstrations and rallies and issues and things that were on the TV screen every night, on the news, started to break that down. So I think that it sort of increased the opening in society for talking about social issues. And I think another effect was that people who were my age and a little bit older, who were like me, because of the war, they might have had family connections or a teacher, or for some reason they had some connection with the party or knew of it, were drawn into activity. So, but by and large, most of the student stuff passed us by. I mean, we participated in the big coalitions, but most of the student movement saw itself as more radical and more revolutionary and the new left, and we were the old left, and we were the discredited ones. So they weren't going to make our mistakes. So there was the old left, new left thing. I think more was made of it and is more apparent than real, but there was some reality to it. There was a generation gap. There was a gap in experience of people who were coming into struggles that were militant, based on community and student organizations, which was different than the party membership, which was primarily in the union movement, which was at the time still very conservative. There were, people who when they joined, had to swear that they weren't a member of the party. That was part of the swearing-in ceremony in a lot of locals. There were, a number of unions, but very few which came out against the war until 69, 70. That started to shift too. And at that point, there's, some of those divisions started to break down. But I think the party It was a mixed experience. It was primarily older folks who were based in the labor movement versus younger folks who said, we're not going to make those mistakes, and why should we be connected with the labor movement, because that's old, stodgy, and conservative, and what's happening is elsewhere.
And this happened within
Sure.
the Communist Party itself, the younger members sort of...
Well, no, I don't think this was between us and the other sections of the left.
I see, okay.
More. Within the party, I mean, I think those of us who made that choice were consciously choosing a working class approach. And there were big battles in SDS over similar issues, but primarily that didn't have a lot to do with the party. There were people who went the way of the Weathermen, there were people who went the way of the Maoists, and there were people who said, no, we don't want anything to do with that revolutionary radical stuff, we're just against the war. So those splits didn't have a lot to do with the party. And most of them sort of tolerated our participation in movements and coalitions and demonstrations. So, I mean, we were affected by the ferment and we were part of it, but I wouldn't say we were at the heart of any of the student action here. That was elsewhere, came from elsewhere. And